This is a soul for
Here we are, episode 2. Welcome, Jay.
Thanks.
Nice to have you back, brother.
Awesome to be here. You were serious when you said we were going to do like this weekly.
I certainly am serious, my friend. I certainly am serious.
Uh-huh.
So here we are, episode 2. We thought we'd start it off, just a bit of a quick recap of the weekend sport, mate. The Tongans. Is there a better support group in rugby league in the world, Jack? What would you say, mate?
Well, I think the Barmy Army would probably give the Tongans a bit of a run.
Yeah, that's true.
They have a longer history, even though they are English.
They are.
But the Tongan supporters, can we still call them Mate Maatonga? What's happening there?
From what I understand, there was a few issues with that particular organisation, and that's why they're now called the Tongan Invitation 13.
Very inviting for the Kangaroos, the Great Britain team, and the Kiwis.
Exactly, exactly, and they great performance to beat the Aussies. It was like a historic moment for that league team. And you're right. In Europe, they have that sort of fanatical sort of fan base, but in New Zealand and in a lot of the other Pacific Islands, it's not quite where the Tongans are. They're a level above everybody else, I reckon. And we were at a coffee place down in Sandringham just having a late breakfast, and the amount of Tongan cars going past with flags and their sirens, man, that was awesome, bro. And hats off to the Tongans, hats off to the Kiwis for beating the Poms. Well done to both teams, and hard luck to Samoa, but well done to Fiji. The All Blacks last game against Wales, did you get to catch any of that, Jay?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
They won, right?
They did win. Ben Smith, mate, he was phenomenal in that game, I thought.
Great send-off.
Maybe if he had been in the other games, hindsight's always a good thing, but they may have made a little bit of a difference. But again, the All Blacks look like the All Blacks that we know, under control, under pressure, they coped, and just attacking football at its finest, mate. And finally, the UFC. Masvidal, how do you say his name?
Masvidal?
There you go.
Yeah.
And Diaz, I was really looking forward to that fight. I hadn't looked forward to a fight like that since Israel fought last. Wee bit disappointing in regards to how it
stoppage.
Yeah, how it stopped, but yeah, that was it was a hype fight, and the BMF fight, I think they called it. But yeah, it's getting a bit blurred, the lines there, Jay, with the Rock coming out with the belt and all that sort of stuff.
I saw that photo, yeah.
Sort of WWE, sort of UFC combining there, which is an interesting path that they're going along.
Wow, that's just continuing with Ronda Rousey and Brock Lesnar and sort of those crossover athletes, I think they call them.
That's right, that's right.
And, it sort of shows that, I think especially in the fight game and even in sports or contact sports, combat sports, you kind of need a plan after, because you can't fight forever, you can't play contact sport definitely forever.
That's right.
So what are you sort of going to transition to after?
Yeah.
So that's, but...
well, WWE is a good option for a lot of them. And speaking of combat sports, Jay, I know you've had a few entries into a ring in a steel cage. Tell us a little bit about that experience, mate. I mean, I take my hat off to anybody that jumps into a ring, for sure. I know one of my son's friends, Wurumi Shaki, jumped into a ring, and that's something different, mate. But give us a little bit of background about the experience of jumping into a ring or a cage, bro.
Oh, sure. I've done a bit of charity fighting, so a bit of MMA, a bit of boxing, a bit of kickboxing. I guess for me it was just an opportunity to raise money for some really good charities out there, and everyone says, I think Mike Tyson said it, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Yeah. And it's definitely true when you're going to jump into a cage or in a ring, any of that sort of stuff, that you're prepared for it physically, but also mentally. Yeah. And again, you've got to sort of have the right reasons for why you do those things. Again, for me, it was an opportunity to raise some money for some really good charities. We raised money for the Children's Surgical Centre, for example. Yeah. They're a hospital in Cambodia.
This is in Hong Kong, right?
Yeah. So when I was in Hong Kong,
I
did, as I said, did a bit of fighting there. But this particular charity, I actually got a chance to go to Cambodia and actually visit the surgical centre there, and shout out again to all the doctors and nurses that do a great job there looking after all those kids, because in a place like Cambodia, for example, if you know anything about the killing fields and everything, Khmer Rouge and everything that happened in Pol Pot, punk ass, those people suffered, and I guess it was an opportunity to sort of help people there. Which is why I did it. yeah, as I said, I think it's important when you do get into those sorts of environments that you're prepared in every way possible, but also understand that there is, if you're going to be a professional fighter, for example, and I wasn't a professional fighter, I got to spar and be a punching bag for a number of the pro fighters around Hong Kong, so shout out to everyone at Impact Hong Kong and all that sort of stuff, Alani Alani and Leandro Nada, for example. But I think, you really have to understand, give yourself a good understanding of why you're going to get into a cage. For some people, it's it's a way to prove themselves. Like I've done a bit of charity fighting. I've trained charity fighters as well, and for a lot of them, it's like probably one of the biggest achievements that they can have.
Yeah.
And while that's important, sort of be mindful as well that there are sort of lots of repercussions to going along and doing those sorts of sports, just like rugby. The concussion is a big thing. CTE is always a big thing as well. And obviously in combat and contact sports these days, there's a lot more evidence to suggest that that's kind of eventually what you'll get to.
Yeah.
So, for myself, whenever I'd get in there, while we would do a lot of heavy sparring, which is quite old school, didn't have to do, we did a lot of other sort of conditioning, which would get you ready for a fight. I think looking at sort of UFC and sort of the big promotions, Bellator's another big one. They have this sort of roster of stars, and some of them get to benefit and go along for the ride. Conor McGregor's probably a good example of that. How he was able to cross over into boxing. Yeah. But then you've got all these other guys that after they're kind of done, they're done. And then what do they sort of go into after that? Yeah. So that's sort of what when I would go and fight. I'd be very mindful that I was fighting for a charity, not for pride. If you've ever fought in a gym or you've ever done jiu-jitsu or whatever it is, you leave your ego at the door and you learn, but you also help your sparring partners. And that's something I try and, when I coach people striking or boxing these days, for example, learn to look after your partner, because if you don't have any sparring partners, you can't train. And then ultimately, when you get in the cage, what is it for? Are you fighting for charity? Awesome. There's lots of good charity fighters out there and that sort of stuff. If you're making a career of it, know that it's a very limited career. It's probably even shorter than rugby, for example. You got to have something else to transition into after. But good fun though. Not too bad.
You look like you had fun, mate. There was one particular part in a fight that I remember where the dude it's quite a large dude, right? He did a back kick and you just stood there and were like, wow, what's going on?
Yeah, spinning back kick.
And then I think you Superman punched him, right?
Well, we learnt that in training a couple of weeks before. That's kind of the other thing I found. Like, if you talk to any sort of combat coach, or if you go to a combat class or a fighting class, try and use what they teach you. If they teach you how to throw a Superman punch or spinning back kick, try and show that you at least appreciate what they've shared with you and try and use it, whether it's in that session or in this case in the ring or in the cage. And when they land, they land. Bit different though with that particular fight because we're all both in headgear. So I take my hat off to amateur fighters and professional fighters because they fight without headgear. That makes them. I actually think, and this is why they took headgear out of boxing in the Olympics. I think in the last Olympics, when you wear headgear, it's actually a bigger target. So that's why they actually done away with headgears for sparring and boxing. Because either way, if you've got a nice big headgear around your head, I just punch you there. I'm not landing cleanly, but you're still getting that repeated trauma. And again, that's what CTE is. It's repeated trauma, and it builds up. I think they call it tau. I don't know what it stands for, but it builds up in your brain, and that's what basically leads into onset dementia and mood problems and all that sort of stuff. Obviously affects the amygdala, which is part of aggression, that part of your brain, for those of you who follow anatomy. It's
a lot of soccer players have that through headering the ball so often, right?
I think a lot of them back in the 50s, like your time. You remember when you were playing football? The black and white. No?
Settle down, Tiger.
Oh, sorry, mate. Remember the old leather balls that they used to like
once they got wet.
Once they got wet, I remember the old All Black, those brown black balls that we used to play with. They were quite heavy.
The Adidas ones.
You'd kick it like, you'd actually feel it. And then they sort of brought out all these synthetic rugby balls.
Well, speaking of that ball, I mean, how good was Grant Fox at kicking when he used to kick with that thing? Didn't have a tee. He used to make a little mound with some sand and kick the ball over 9 times out of 10.
Accuracy.
Who was the other guy? Going back in the day.
Goal kicker
for the All Blacks.
Don Clark?
Yeah.
Wasn't he like Mal Meninga?
Toe hacker, mate.
Mal Meninga.
Back in those days, they didn't have the light designed ball. They didn't have the tee. They just had a little bit of sand or dirt and a very heavy ball. So that was quite an achievement by those lads.
A different time. But still those skills. And you saw obviously in the Rugby World Cup with kicking being such an important thing.
Yeah.
England just gave away too many penalties, right?
Yeah, they
10 odd penalties and 6 of them at scrum time.
Yeah.
As the ex-front row, I quite enjoyed watching, sort of the English getting touched up, because they probably would have gone into that game wanting to assert themselves like they did against the All Blacks. They were superb at set piece. South Africans wouldn't let it down. The beast was awesome. I think they probably decided they were going to gang up on whoever the tight head was. So I think Kyle Snickler, I quite like Kyle Snickler, if you guys know who he is. He's sort of the epitome of what you want on a tight head prop. He's got all the ball skills, he's aggressive, he looks mean, he makes his tackles and all that sort of stuff. But with him getting injured early, he took an elbow from Tojo. I think England lost a bit, but they brought on someone pretty experienced, Dan Coles, who's a very experienced scrummager,
very
strong
experienced.
prop. But like I reckon, South Africa would have targeted the tight head. That's what you do. When you've got a really strong tight head prop, too much rugby talk. You try and pin and attack the tight head, because you take away a tight head's ability to go forward, the scrum goes backwards, and they give away penalties because it's easier for them to stand up. So I think that was it was really smart by Erasmus and the South Africans. But I mean, just the pride that you heard while they were singing the anthem. My God, I tell you what, there's the Samoan anthem.
Okay.
That'll bring a tear to the eye for me. But also the South African anthem. The Māori version of the New Zealand anthem, I'll belt that out. But whenever you hear the South African anthem, it's something else because of the lyrics, right? That they will stand, all that sort of stuff. And it really epitomises why rugby is strong in that country and why they can come together and, like the All Blacks, win the damn thing 3 times.
Well, I think the best team won that night. And I think they won it for the best reason. If you hear the coach and the captain speak, I was really surprised to see a black captain, man. I haven't been following the World Cup that much because it's been on Spark and buffering all the time. But man, I was so humbled and proud to see that story, about how it wasn't just about the rugby, it was about what's going on in South Africa at the moment and the challenges that the everyday people are facing. That the challenges that the South African team were facing was nothing compared to the realities of back home. So, man, that was a great story. It was nearly as good a story as the '95 World Cup, right? Where they brought the country together. Different country now, but still the same sort of issues.
Same sort of problems, right? They really, Coach Erasmus really defined what pressure is. And I think that's the thing we have to remember when we're playing. If we're fortunate enough, and for those that have been fortunate enough to play sport at an international level or a professional level, there's the pressure of winning and earning a paycheck or earning bonuses, but, real pressure is, like he said, people getting murdered, not having a job, not having a future. That's what real pressure is in life. And, if you're lucky enough, you'll sort of have some of the skills to get through that. And if you're not, then you can sort of have some problems. So.
Exactly. Now, Sonny Bill Williams, he's got a, $10 million 2-year deal with, who is it?
Toronto Wolfpack. They play in the Super League, right?
Apparently so. Toronto Wolfpack is that a Canadian team?
Yes.
Wow. And they're going to travel all the time to the...
But I believe so. So, I mean, $10 million offered to the man. I think they're trying to chase Manu Tuolangi as well.
Are they really?
Yeah. So they're trying to build up, sort of their players.
Yeah.
They better be careful, though. A bit like how Saracens, which is the team that a lot of those English players played for, they just got done for the salary cap, right?
Right.
Because they were paying players a little bit extra over the salary cap, but to their companies.
Yeah.
Like these players had, I think Marco and Billy Villapolo and I think even Owen Farrell. They started these companies, so they were getting paid as players, but then I think they were getting a bit extra.
Right.
So it's
money laundering,
something like that, So it's I mean, and probably the exciting thing as well for those guys, I think they talk about for the Wolfpack is that they're also making some sort of Netflix movie. You're a Netflix man. You into Netflix?
I'm a Netflix man, mate. I love it. Love my Stranger Things. And some other stuff that's on there at the moment. There's a lot of rubbish, but there's also some real gems.
Oh, sure. Cool.
Yeah. So speaking of Sonny, obviously he's set for life, right? He's pretty much set himself up financially, and he looks like I love Sonny, to be honest, a good-looking fella, but I respect and admire what he's achieved in sport. I mean, he sort of revolutionised what it was to be a sportsman, right? Boxer,
crossed over,
league player, rugby player. And the times I've met him, he's been a real humble, approachable sort of dude,
Awesome.
So you wanted to speak briefly, you wanted to speak about life after rugby and you know, some of the thoughts and your views on that. What Sonny set up for life, that doesn't happen to, you know, every player that comes into the international scene, does it?
Probably one end of the spectrum. And as I said before with the Conor McGregor example, there's guys that end up at the other end of the spectrum.
Yep.
If you're playing a professional sport, you obviously want to walk away from the sport financially set up,
Yep.
sort up your family, all that sort of stuff, and hopefully walk away with not too much, in this case, brain damage. But then, you know, I've got a lot of mates that have played professionally, played internationally, All Blacks, Monosama, or whatever it was.
Yep.
A lot of them are now suffering with concussion or CTE, for example. CTE, and you know that means that they can't work. That means that, you know, they're almost a burden on their family, and all that, the life that they had before all of that sort of set in, has sort of affected them in quite a negative way.
Yeah.
Now, again, when you sign up to be a professional athlete or professional sports person, you should understand the risks. You should understand that if I'm going to play a contact sport or a combat sport, eventually the ride will finish, and hopefully I don't sort of come out the other end like a vegetable.
Yeah.
So you kind of want to sort of to set things up while you're playing sport that will allow you to transition. A plan B.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of applies to any sort of, I guess, any sort of career or job that you go into. So if you're in a job where, you know, you could be easily replaced, for example, maybe eventually will be replaced by AI, you need to have sort of something else that you can transition into. And what I've found as an ex-athlete is that you need to find things that you can transition to that you find fulfillment in.
Yeah.
And that's that word fulfillment and purpose and also those sorts of terms. If you listen to people like, for example, Tony Robbins, who's quite big in the personal development industry, they talk about those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter what that is for you, because everyone's a bit different. What are you going to find purpose in after sport or professional sport or fighting? What is it? For some people that's coaching, that's staying within that industry. For other people it could be something totally different. I think our people, when I say our people, Māori and Pacific especially, we tend to be quite creative. We tend to have, you know, ability to sing and dance and entertain, wear different hats, I guess a bit like what we're doing now.
Yeah.
We need to be able to utilise those skills and find ways to sort of find a way to bridge into those things. No, obviously they're not always going to be financially viable or financially good, right? But again, I think I know for myself, I would rather, like we do now, I'd rather be doing something like this, a podcast where we're sharing knowledge and information. Yeah, we don't get paid for it, but hey, we're getting a chance to meet and talk to other people and share the knowledge and share their experiences. I find that very fulfilling. So, and I would hope, and when I talk to, like I said, my mates, that they find those sorts of avenues. Yes, they've been affected by concussion or CTE in this case, but eventually they find their way into something. You look at a lot of ex-players, and I'm hopeful we'll get a few ex-high-profile players to come on our podcast quite soon. There's a few lined up. I'll probably share sort of their experience and how they have transitioned out of, you know, being in the spotlight, being an All Black, being an international athlete, being a fighter, whatever it is, how they've transitioned into the next stage of their life. Because we all go through different stages.
Yep.
And depending on, you know, what stage you're in, you want to find a way to transition to the next stage successfully. So look after yourself, but then look after your family as well.
No doubt, no doubt. And it would be a difficult transition, I would think, when you've got all the, you know, you have all the limelight, people, you know, kissing your butt all the time, telling you how great you are, and to have that, you know, one day just shut off like a tap would be pretty difficult. I'm sure it's not just sport people that find that sort of transition hard. I'm sure it's like actors and stuff as well, people that are in the limelight and are always in the papers and stuff like that. So it's a very interesting sort of transition, isn't it? And a lot of the guys, maybe they're just not aware of how to transition back into what we call a normal life. And the other thing is with a lot of the players that are coming through at the moment, they're very young, right? So they don't know anything different. They've never had a 9-to-5 job. They've gone straight basically from school to this level and then to another level. And I'm not sure whether the unions or the places are actually teaching these guys what to do, you know, after they've finished their careers. So
I think a lot of organisations they bring in player welfare officers.
Right.
I think if you look at, say, the NRL, so the National Rugby League in Australia, they have people like Nigel Vagana, who I believe is basically a Pacific liaison officer, has that sort of role and sort of helps those players to understand the process.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, I remember when I was playing a bit of age group for coming through the Auckland rugby system, even in the academy stuff, you would still go and you'd still be doing either education. I went to university. Some people were doing trades. Some people were doing different types of jobs. So you still had to be doing something besides rugby. You can't just be a rugby player.
Yeah.
We live in a country where being a rugby player is like the ultimate, but the reality is only a select number will make it to the very top.
That's right.
Other people will go overseas. So you've always got to have something else. But I think something else that's fulfilling. Doesn't matter what it is. Like if there's something you've always wanted, if you always wanted to play rugby, great. But what else do you really like to do?
Yeah.
Because you're one shoulder, you're one knee. I mean, like yourself, you had your knee injuries and all that sort of stuff, and you couldn't play as much anymore. You need something else to transition into that's going to fulfill you.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. So.
Very important. Very important. It's interesting one, mate. What else have you got there on your mind there, Jack?
I guess speaking of transitions and milestones, it's my oldest boy's Dominic's 5th birthday on Saturday.
Wee.
Yeah, and that's been a fun process to sort of go through to get him ready for that.
Yep.
But then it sort of got me thinking about sort of, as we go through life, there's sort of ages. Like what are sort of the big, like first birthday?
Yep.
That's always a big one. 5th birthday, but then what birthdays after that are sort of the big ones?
Well, there's always the 21st, mate.
21st, yeah, that's another
If
big
you're in
one.
the States, it's the Sweet 16.
Yeah.
Well, that's about it, really, that I can think of. I mean, we celebrated nearly every year for our children, but they were on different levels of expense and celebration, I guess. Like you say, the 1st and the 5th, very important.
Very important.
And then we haven't come to the 21st yet. Neither have you, buddy. So, yeah.
Do you remember your 21st?
I remember my 21st. It's a wee while ago at the rotating. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
29 years ago.
Hey.
Actually, it was a really good night.
It wasn't too bad.
Thank
It
you for
wasn't
hosting
too
us. That was cool.
You're more than welcome. You're
yeah.
more than welcome. Glad you had nice feed. But yeah, so what were you thinking about that? The birthdays?
Yeah, I just think it's interesting how we prioritise certain birthdays over others, I guess. And again, it's more of a cultural thing or wherever you're from. But then, sort of 50ths, I mean, that's usually a big one. People always and 40ths as well, and 30ths. So as we got sort of into our adult years, there's sort of decade. I think each decade you're alive, you're probably a little bit more thankful that you've made it to another decade, another decade. And I guess 65 is kind of when you retire, right?
Yeah.
At least that's sort of in that traditional pathway that a lot of people take where they retire from work.
Yeah.
Sort of 65. Although a lot of people these days, they're not retiring at 65, are they?
No. Well, it's becoming a bit hard to do that in some instances, isn't it? The cost of living is, you don't always save up enough in your KiwiSaver to warrant living off the benefit or the pension that you get. So
Sure.
I think 100 as well. You get a card. Was it from Queen Elizabeth?
Oh yeah.
I think she sends you out a card. I don't think I'm going to make it that far, but never mind. I don't think I want to actually. But
I wanted to have a quick chat about. Hopefully, the listeners out there or the watchers out there, if you've ever heard of a guy called Sir Ken Robson, English guy, author, educator. I saw his TED talk from a few years back, and then a more recent talk he was giving at a conference, and he was talking about sort of how our education system pretty messed up, to be honest. And as an educator myself, I mean, I was a teacher, I got to tutor at university, that sort of thing. I can sort of see where he was coming from, and at the heart of sort of his talk or his message, it was talking about how our education system is basically set up, sort of based on setting up people back in the industrial age.
yeah,
Setting up factory workers, having people in a little bit of space, but not so much selling their mental labour, but obviously they're more their physical labour. So this idea that, you'd have to use your muscles and you'd be in a factory environment, as opposed to looking sort of more at their mental muscles or their creativity, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And when I sort of look at what he talks about in education today, I think that's sometimes where we miss the boat in a lot of institutions, because it's all focusing on sort of setting people up to sort of be yes people and not really be creative or use things like critical thinking or have a more rounded education. I mean, one thing I heard is that physical education or PE isn't compulsory anymore, like in certain schools.
Really?
Yeah.
How ridiculous is that?
Well, it's pretty crazy, right? Because when
We've
they
got to move, mate.
Well, you got to move, otherwise, you're going to have all these. If you just sit in a classroom or you sit in, you're just studying all day.
Yeah.
How do you expect your brain to function? I mean, if there's any people out there still at school or uni, let us know, because I've got nephews and nieces that say, yeah, you can basically stop doing PE after fifth form or whatever the equivalent is now. Shows how old we are, fifth form, for school C. But again, if you sort of look at where education evolved from the Greeks to the Romans, obviously into the English and systems and all that sort of stuff, it was more about a lot of the time having a more rounded education. Obviously, initially, Greeks, for example, it was more aimed towards men. Because then they could vote as citizens and all that sort of stuff. We'll put in some links so people can have a look. But having a more rounded education gave you an opportunity to sort of, again, use those different skills. Whereas what happened basically come the industrial age, it focused the attention on just a small part of people's capacity, and that was sort of their physical labour. Because they wanted them working in factories. Ironically, which is what a lot of Māori and Pacific done even into the 19th and 20th century, right? So when we're thinking about education, and both you and I as fathers, I guess the big thing for us is trying to encourage them to find their creative talents. Your kids are really great at art and dancing and music, and great athletes as well, like Denise, not you obviously. So I think those are sort of, when we're talking about education these days, we want to be encouraging our kids to sort of focus on those talents. Because you're always going to have numeracy and literacy and all that sort of stuff that you can use, but it's where I think where you find fulfillment. Now, but if you really like maths, or you really like English, or you really like science, then obviously pursue that, but also encourage kids to sort of follow sort of that path of where their talent takes them.
Definitely.
Because I think a lot of it also comes down to sort of university entrance as well. And again, I speak from experience as someone that's worked in university, been a university student. These days, everyone expects to go to university, which is fine, but once they come out of university, everyone else has a degree as well. Or everyone else has a master's or has a PhD, depending on what you study. So it's this constant race to try and basically obtain higher education, but that filters down through all the different levels of education. What I mean by that is, so one of my first jobs when I was in Hong Kong, I used to teach English interview technique, to 3-year-olds. So
3-year-olds?
3-year-olds. So I'd sit down with them, they'll be like, okay, this is what you want to say, and I'd have a script in there. So I was like,
oh no, a 3-year-old.
3-year-olds, yeah, serious.
Wow, okay.
So even at the age of 3, you're having these kids have to learn how to say, my favourite movie is.
These are mainly Asian children.
These were local children.
Right. Okay.
So when I was a net teacher, a native English teacher in Hong Kong, one of my jobs there, that was one of my, and I'll always remember that, because I was like, why are we getting 3-year-olds to try and go through interviews first of all?
Very strange.
Free play and all that sort of stuff. So it's a different system there, but that all stems basically back. Education there is, get into a good kindergarten, get into a good primary school, intermediate, college, university, and then you kind of set. But the reality is there's so many people coming out the other end with the same qualification as you. What will set you apart is probably more your personality, your intercommunication skills, how well your empathy, how well you relate with others. That'll probably make the difference. So it's an interesting thing. Like I said, if you ever get a chance, Google or YouTube, Sir Ken Robson, he's got some really good TED Talks and discussions on education.
All right, so that's our second podcast done there, Kaz.
Unbelievable.
Well done, mate. Well done. I thought it was a goodie. We are looking forward to having some guests on our next podcast. We're working on that at the moment. I'm sure they're going to bring some interesting and informative stories to our little podcast table. But you got anything else to add there, Jay?
Just a big thank you again to everyone that's listened and watched. We are available on the different podcast platforms as well. We'll put the links in the description below. And thanks for the feedback. We did listen. That's why we're wearing the matching t-shirts today. So thank you for that feedback. I think we look good in white. What do you reckon?
It brings out our eyes.
Probably more our eyebrows.
Oh, there's a Nielsen eyebrows, mate.
Or Malmaninga eyebrows, I think, is probably more appropriate. But yeah,
okay,
but definitely good feedback. Keep it coming in. And as I said, we look forward to catching up with you next time. So
yeah, you've got his thighs as well. But all love, no hate. Whalaia.
So far.